My goal is this morning to give you a biblical theology of buildings. So if you were making the drive this morning thinking, I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it, that should cement it for you. That's what you're going to leave with today. No, I wanted to be helpful. Obviously, we're going through the core groups, and part of our hope and part of my prayer is that as we're going through them, that God will speak to folks and resonate with them about where they might see their fit within our church life, help to discern what our particular gifts and skill set are and where our interests are, and if all that can marry up to kind of helping to help us work together to take the church forward. But if that's not relevant to you and you're about as useful with practical things as I am, then I hope a biblical theology of buildings is going to be something you'll get from today. There was a time when I went to New York. Victoria took me for my 30th birthday, and I was in awe of the buildings. It really is an architectural wonder as you're going around. And I came across this story of one particular building there that someone got very attached to. It was called the Flatiron Building, and there was a young lady by the name of Rosa Wilder Lane. And what she started doing was, she was obviously an artistic person in the 20th century, and she began to become enamored by the building, watching the bustle around it, noticing the architectural details, and she started using the building as a diary. She started writing to the building, expressing her thoughts and her feelings. And then to her great surprise, the building started writing back to her. The caretaker, a very kind man who was the caretaker, began taking these letters, reading them, and then writing back to her, but under the name of the building. But they developed a lifelong connection and friendship from that, all through the conduit of the building. Because buildings at their best should be channeling the ingenuity and the creativity that we have as image bearers of God into something that helps us come alive as humans, and certainly that helps us connect with that sense of divinity. Now, as much as that's true today, that was ever more so true in the ancient world, which is why I've planted the first half of this in the Exodus. We know from other ancient texts, particularly Ugaritic literature of the time, that it was quite common for folks to construct some sort of tent dwelling in order to connect and commune with the divine. So one purpose of buildings has always been, I mean, that's going back, we have those documents from about 2000 BC. That's always been a purpose. But then also, it's had the effect of, as I was sharing with the kids, of giving us a sense of grandeur of certain groups of people, particularly royalty. We've got records from Ramesses II, the Pharaoh of Egypt, who, when he was going on war campaigns into battle, he would have a movable tent construction, which had a series of ascending courts, and he had the inner sanctum and sanctuary. And that was for his sense of grandeur, his privacy. It meant nobody was allowed to go in there, and you weren't able to have access, even on a battlefield sort of setting, camped out to the great Pharaoh, to the great king. So we take all of that and we start to see the context in which the Old Testament is written, and we see that it's, as always, it is going along with the grain of society in some ways, and in other ways it's doing something really special and unique. So I want to think about what the purpose, at their absolute best, what buildings are for, and what we would hopefully use buildings for. Firstly, they're a place of divine encounter. And then secondly, they are a place of human connection. And we're going to look at that from both passages. So let's start with divine encounter. And the passage Stuart read for us from the Old Testament in the tabernacle. The tabernacle is probably one of those parts where, if you're in a Bible reading plan and you're making your way through the Old Testament, it starts to become a bit of a slog when you're reading about tent pegs and poles and curtains, and you're thinking, why am I reading a manual for a building and I'm trying to do my Bible readings? But all of that had a very important function. The tabernacle is given to the children of Israel. They've come out of Egypt. They're liberated and set free. And they're now wandering through the wilderness on the way to the promised land. And Moses is given these really detailed instructions for what he should construct and why. Now, tabernacle was about It's all given in cubits. Let's translate it. It's about 150 feet long by about 75 feet wide. And it's put together as a series of ascending courts. It's got the outer one, and then it's got an inner one, and then right in the center, it's got the innermost or the most holy place, what becomes the Holy of Holies. And that's where God revealed his divine presence only to the high priest and only at certain times of the year. But the function of all of that was that it would communicate something about who they believed God was. You know, because other societies around them, well, that kind of construction was for their kings. But they don't have any human being who's worthy of having that constructed. They're saying, no, the living and the true God, Yahweh, that's who we're going to make this kind of building for. That's who we believe is going to show up and meet us in this sacred space at certain times of the year. And it's given them to them as a people on the move. A tabernacle is given as a set of instructions for a tent that can be put up and broken down fairly quickly and keep traveling with them. It's got a sense of impermanence. It's got a sense of God wanting to connect with and be with his people regardless of where they are. And here's the real purpose of it. I mean, in Exodus, if we go back to Exodus 25, when the Lord begins to give Moses these instructions, this is what he says to him in Exodus 25, I think it's verse 8. Yes. Then, this is after the instructions for the priest, let them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. We've thought about covenants in a previous series here, and how God bonds himself to his people and makes his promise. And what's that really all about? It's the fact that we find a God who, as much as he is all-powerful and worthy of worship, he has an intense desire to be bonded with and present with his people and to actually connect with them. And that's why this tabernacle is given. And it's given according to this pattern because everything in it is meant to speak to them about who God is and what his purposes are in the world. I don't have time to go into it, and it would be such a huge detour, but let's sum it up by saying a lot of the way the tabernacle and then the temple are constructed have got ornaments that point to the creation and to the Garden of Eden and to the great original purpose. It was to bring them back and ground them to the fact that God had made the world that they were in, and he was continuing to rule. And they saw this as the meeting place of heaven and earth. This was the one open channel that they knew where heaven and earth were going to come together. And so they could bring all their worship, their sacrifices, their aspirations, their confessions. And it's starting to sound a lot like what we still do today with where we go in order to worship. But so that was what the tabernacle was. But how was it then sort of put together and cared for? I'm sure you heard some really interesting details when Stuart was reading. In verse 10, who does he call to come and take part in this? All who are skilled among you are to come and to make everything the Lord has commanded. Now, I think this is I'm going to apply this as I go along today because it's so practical and so easy to apply for us. There's a differentiation. I shared last week about how when I was a youngster, I desperately wanted to be good at football, but I would have wasted a lot of time and probably my own energy had I continued to flog a dead horse with that. So I gave it up and I focused my energies on things that are hopefully more useful, like preaching. But all who are skilled among you, God gives us all, distributes these gifts and what we're good at and we've got a natural propensity for. And then he puts the word out and he calls people to come into the service of his kingdom and what he's doing here in the world and the exciting initiative and asking people to join and be part of that. And this is why, again, man, I'm really giving myself a doing, but this is why I'm not on the property team, because I'm not much use at that either. Everything I look to do practically has about a 50% success rate. So sometimes it works, but Victoria will attest to the fact that there's been many graveyards of attempted projects over the years that I've had to give up. And then sometimes I do it and I pull it off and I look at it and in disbelief and I go, that actually worked. Maybe I'll try that again. And then then it doesn't work the next time. And now Victoria will sometimes come and speak to me and give me the nod of, it's time to phone somebody else who knows what they're doing. So, it's not really I would not be in this all who are skilled among you. I would not be getting the call. But there's other things as well, because we might not be practically and technically skilled, but there's other things that we can do to support the care of the buildings, if you like. Then the whole Israelite community in verse 20, and everyone who was willing and whose heart moved them came and brought offerings to the Lord to work on the tent of meeting. I love this picture because there's no need for anyone really to be excluded from something as important as caring for where we worship and where we have encounter with God, because those who are skilled come and join it and work on it. And if that's you and that's what God is calling you to, then brilliant. More hands to the plow. But we can all also bring whatever it is we have. Sometimes we have ingenuity of mind, sometimes we have money, sometimes, and this is not the hard sell, and I'll never do the hard sell. I don't like doing that because I don't think it's useful, and I trust God by His Holy Spirit to move folks, to show them where they are useful and what they actually have, and for Him to be the one who motivates them to actually, this is what I can throw in without necessarily being terribly skillful in the primary area. And then in that was 10 and 20, and then in verse 24 we get another detail about why all this matters. Why does it matter that we don't do the driving, or that we don't do the if you like, standing over people and getting them to do the work? Those presenting an offering, verse 24, of silver or bronze brought it as an offering to the Lord. And anyone who had any acacia wood for any part of the work brought it. The church works best where everyone is in their own sense of connection and relationship to God, brings whatever it is they can do or whatever it is they have. And that's what makes it quite beautiful, because we can all just do different things. We are all variously gifted in different ways, and we're able to bring. But the important thing is that God motivates us to do that bringing, and not any human, and not any church structure, and not any demands. And I think what a faithful church looks like is where this is happening. And it's a privilege for me to be here and to be a part of it, because I'm often fond of saying, but I think you deserve the encouragement, is that this is a really generous church, and whenever there has been things that we've needed to do, we've really pulled together and made things happen. And that is a testament to the fact that you're a generous people. And I think as well that the Spirit of God is clearly at work and clearly still has plans here, because we're moving according to the blueprint that is here, that we have skilled and gifted people, and Irvin heads up the property team, and there are gifted people who can do that practical thing and respond to that calling. But we also have people who come and bring their offerings. And I want you to not discount whatever it is you've ever brought to church in terms of offerings, what you've put into the plate, or whether you've given time and your mental energy. I want you to know that people being able to have this divine encounter, being able to come and meet with God and sense His presence and know He's at work in their lives, that's all important. Having somewhere to do that is something that goes back thousands of years. It goes back to the earliest instructions. Why? Because God wanted a place where people could do that. And I wanted to connect this to the tabernacle rather than the temple. And I think there's a decent reason for that, because the temple eventually gets built in Jerusalem, and it's a fixed building, and it's still contentious today because of geography. But I feel like the tabernacle's a bit more like what you and I experience, in that our buildings are not very rarely on a permanent sacred site. But as we put them up, and people come and take part in the life and the witness of the church, and they come and bring their offerings, and they encounter God, and they feel the gospel doing their soul some good year after year, then they start to take on a certain resonance and quality, and we start to become somewhat attached to them. And I think all that is to be celebrated. Because there's often a debate over, well, maybe we just shouldn't be attached to the buildings, or maybe the building doesn't matter. And, all of that, I don't think you can get support from Scripture for. They're eminently important because why did God start getting us to put up buildings in the first place? Because they're to be a place of divine encounter. And place and space is important. We are made to inhabit space, and we are made to come and connect with God in spaces and places. And for that to awaken and kindle our memory and our passions and our desire to continue to meet with God. I'm going to jump then when I think of the next point. It's not only a place of divine presence, but it's a place of human connection. And that's where I found the Acts passage really helpful. Now, the context for that is that we're obviously skipping forward several thousand years. Christ has come. He's died, he's been resurrected, raised to life again, and ascended to the right hand of God the Father. And the church movement has absolutely exploded in this time. It's very much seen as a new kind of phenomenon in the world, which they are. There's a lot of people being drawn to this because it's based on the resurrected Jesus. And I love the details that Luke gives us in Acts of what they started to do. The believers sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had a need. They continued to meet together in the temple courts, and they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Now, I actually think there's so much there, because you sometimes, there are church movements and circles which say that the early church, the Acts church, what they did was they got rid of the buildings and they met in houses and in house groups and had house church. And so if we want to be really interested in what God's up to, we need to get back to that. But that overlooks the fact that they, in verse 46, continued to meet in the temple courts. So think about that. Jesus has been raised to life, and they've understood that all that happened to Jesus was God's divine plan for the forgiveness of their sins and to reconcile God to them. And they see that as God's final plan of salvation. And they start to believe and hope in that. And it's a huge step change to what they've known in terms of going to the temple and offering sacrifices. And they're starting to understand all of that is changing. And even still, even though they're meeting in their homes and they're probably doing communion and services in their homes, they're still going to meet in the temple courts. Why? Because for them, it was a place that they associated not only with God being there, but with being able to connect with other people who were like-minded. Because we're such social and societal creatures, and we absolutely need that sense of horizontal connection as well. And so the temple, even in this day, continued to fulfill an important function. And then within a couple of hundred years, the Christian church is already erecting buildings that are going to do the exact same thing. Whichever way we spin it, we can't get away from the fact that we seem to want to continue to have places, spaces, and indeed buildings where we have that sense of coming together and being united in purpose and in mind and heart, in especially worship, but also in friendship and in fellowship and in getting to know other people and seeing and meeting other people who are going to do the same thing and who also want to have that divine connection. See, I don't think you can separate the two, because what's the greatest commandment when they tested Jesus? You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And what we get to participate in with the buildings and the spaces that we create is somewhere where we're reminded of that, but we also get to practice it. So we come to bring God our worship and our love, our thanks for what he's done for us on the cross, our sense of awe and wonder at all that he has made, but we also come to share that experience with others. We also come to have a space that is dedicated just to that. And then that space takes on somewhere where we associate with both divine presence and encounter up the way, but also with human connection out the way. Because God has made us for both, and we're actually incomplete without both. If we don't have the divine encounter, we look for that sense of euphoria, of meaning, of purpose somewhere else. We try and find it as a species. And then if we don't have human connection in all kinds of ways, we start to struggle. And psychologically, we go in on ourselves and we become withdrawn. And that's a self-fulfilling and compounding cycle that leads to all kinds of negative effects. And so the importance of a church and of a space is that it's somewhere that's dedicated and set apart for those things. And so what are the implications of that? We need to work them out as we go along, because this isn't actually a blueprint. This is, as I said, a biblical theology of buildings. I've hopefully tried to demonstrate to you why God instituted buildings as such to be places that are meeting between him and other people, and why they continue to be important. But I would hope that what we can continue to do is look into them, look into ourselves in terms of our gifts and our abilities and our callings, look into where God is leading us to, and then look to follow the principles here. There's no blueprint. There are a million ways of doing this well. But if we have in mind that we want a place that really can be for divine encounter, and we want a place where the best possible human connections can take place so that everyone can find themselves fulfilling their calling from God, then I don't think we'll go far wrong. And I think we'll be able to have buildings and spaces that are honoring to God, and also hopefully communicate to the world how good a God we believe in and how much he has loved us and given himself for us as we continue to express love for him and others. May God bless his word to us this morning. Amen.